All right, let's get started. So the very first thing that we're going to need to make is the item data structure. It's kind of like a master structure that we're going to base our items off of. And it's really important because once we have that in place, we can create the item class, then we can create the inventory to store the items, and so on and so forth. So the item data structure is a pure, it's not going to be a class, it's just going to be a struct stored in a header. And so we're not going to create it through the editor like you normally would. We're going to create it directly in the IDE. So if you're following along in Visual Studio, the process for doing this is going to be really similar. You should be able to, the menu options might even be the exact same. So before I started recording, I like to reorganize my file structures to use the public and private hierarchy. It's not mandatory. It really is up to your personal preference, but in the past when I've done projects, it sorts your CPP files off into a private and your header files off into a public folder. And I've just gotten kind of used to that. And so I just like to reorganize my stuff that way. So just go to wherever you want to have this header. It's going to be kind of like a common header that we can include from anywhere. And we're going to make a new folder. So add directory. I'm going to call it data, just in case in the future we add more, if you want to add more of these kind of data structs. And now I'm going to go back to add file, and this one's just going to be called item data struct.h. Item data structs, because there's going to be multiple structs in here. Okay, and so now we've got a completely blank file. There's nothing, it didn't set up any kind of framework or anything for us. So when doing it this way, creating it manually, you have to add in a couple different things before you can get it to where your U project will actually pick it up and let you use it as part of the code. So first we need our pragma once. That's a preprocessor directive that will basically make it to where it's kind of like a header guard. It will make it to where you can't just keep including this thing over and over and over. If something includes it and then something else includes that, it will see that, oh, hey, I already have a path to this header file. And so it's essentially a way to keep, it's all stuff that happens in the background during the process of compilation, how it handles includes. But anyway, so there's that, and then we need to include core minimal, which is your one of the primary engine includes, and then we need to include the name of the file, item data structs dot generated, dot generated dot h. And so this is something, when you compile, the Unreal header tool runs and generates all this other stuff in the background, and it puts it into this generated.h file. And so you always have to include that, and it has to be the last include, just for future reference. The only other thing we want to put in is the engine data table.h file, and this is because the primary purpose of this file is to build this item data struct, and then we're going to be able to use it in a data table when we get into the editor. And the type that we're making, we can go ahead and do that now, is actually called table row base. So let's start by creating a struct, and it's going to be called f item data. And it's going to inherit from f table row base. So this type as you can see here, it's the base class for all table row structs to inherit from. Anything that goes into a data table needs to be of this type. So now what's going to go in this? So there's going to be a whole bunch of different pieces of info for the items that go into this. The first thing is a couple of enums. So uenum. We're going to make item quality. If you don't know what this is about, so I believe it's that by default in an enum, all the values in it, it's just a way to match like a variable name up to an index essentially, right? So like enums are the equivalent of like taking 0, 1, 2, 3 and then putting a label on it that's easier to use. So that normally uses an integer for each one of those, but by doing this, you're telling it use a uint8 for each one, and so it's kind of just a space-saving measure. Each of your enum fields goes into a uint8 instead of a full integer. So now at this point, as I go through this, if you don't like my nomenclature for stuff or the way that I describe things, feel free to change the names to your liking. And that goes for even the structs itself. I'm just putting in the examples of what I've done, but when you think about what you want to put into an item data collection, put in anything you want. The methodology is going to be the same as we move forward. I kind of feel like with item quality, I feel like games are all a little bit, it's like repetitive nowadays. Everyone uses the same stuff. You have like epic, rare, legendary, and it's just played out, man. It's just like everyone does that. So I wanted to try to mix it up a little bit. I did something like shoddy, common, quality, masterwork, something like that. And then now there's a metadata that you can put into enums. You put umeta display name equals, and then close paren, and now you can put in a name here. And what this is going to do, if we actually go to this, see, it sets the override display name, and I believe what that's going to do is it's going to make it to where, like, say you had some kind of like identifier here that you didn't, that was kind of, I don't know, something with numbers in it or something that was, just a little bit ugly, and you want it to show up in the editor a different way. That's what this is about. So this will make it to where when we access this enum via drop downs and such in the editor, we just see this. So I took a course or followed a tutorial in the past where they use this, and I just thought that seems like it's good practice, but again, not mandatory. All right, so there's item quality. So next we want item type. Now this one's really important because in the way I've implemented it, in certain cases, you want to, especially in the user interface, you want to display certain info or not display certain info for different kinds of items. So say you hover over a consumable, and in the item data you have like armor rating and damage value and this and that. There's no reason to display that stuff for like a potion. So by having an item type enum, you can do a check for that in the user interface and other places and take actions accordingly. So it's throwing a couple types here, something like armor, weapon, shield, spell, quest item, and then like mundane, where, like in Skyrim or something, you can roam around and you pick up basically anything, like silverware off the table. Nobody cares about it. Doesn't sell for anything. That's what I would consider as like a mundane. It's just stuff to kind of help flesh out the world. So I'm going to copy this. Put these in. And copy these names. Okay, so there we have our type. And let's see what's next. So next we want our like item stats, so like item statistics. So it's a struct item statistics, and now this is where you would put in, you know, the stuff I just mentioned. So armor rating, damage value, you know, anything you can think of. This is where you'd put like strength bonus, you know, you equip an item and it gives you +2 to strength or something like that. I'm not going to put in a whole bunch because actually I haven't gone to the point of using these. So like, you know, I'm still in the process of building up ideas for how to implement like a weapon and armor system and stuff like that, and combat and everything. So it's just more of a placeholder for now, but definitely useful. Restoration amount for like consumables or potions, sell value. This is all kind of stuff that you'd want to put in here. Now each one of these is going to be a U property, and it needs to be edited anywhere. The reason is because we're going to be doing all this editing of these items in the data table editor inside the Unreal editor. And so it needs to be specified properly for us to be able to set it and edit it in the editor. So there's item statistics. So now we need item text data. Again, this one's really important for your user interface. This is where you would have your item name, right? Crucial. Description, interaction text, and usage text. So interaction text would be if you encounter it in the world, do you want it to say something specific? If it's a book, you know, you could have it just be a readable thing. So it just says read when you aim at it. If it's a box or something you find, it would say open. Whereas, you know, when you have it in your inventory, you want it to say something different for usage. So like a potion's a perfect example. When you encounter a potion in the world, it's going to say pick up for interaction, and then when you have it in your inventory, it'll say drink or use, you know, something like that. So again, copy these U properties. And before I forget, for each U struct, we need to put in generated U struct body. That is just you know, a macro that's important for the reflection system, and put that at the top of each of these structs. The enums don't need it, they're fine the way they are. All right, so there's our text data, we've got statistics, we want numeric data. So F item numeric data. And now this one, also very important. This is where you're gonna have stuff like weight, maximum stack size. So and then what I also did for the way I've done it is I put in a bool in here where it actually tracks, is it stackable? This is because, you know, later on down the line when you have the inventory, a stackable item and a non-stackable item can be handled a little differently, and also good for the user interface because, you know, if it's not stackable, there's no reason to ever really display this or the quantity because it's always assumed you're going to have just one. So this is a very useful one that we'll use later on. All right, and so the last one for now is going to be item asset data. Asset data is going to be where we have our icon and our mesh. Now it would also be a really great place to store like a sound effect. So you know how in stuff like Diablo, when you pick up items, they all make a nice little sound effect, like potions have a little bubble and then gems do like a ding, and that kind of stuff. This would be a perfect place to store that because, you know, each item is going to be built off of this and this is going to be carried along with it. So having those in here, you know, you set it all beforehand in the data table and then you can access those really easily. But for now, I'm not too worried about sound right now. I am going to handle meshes and like obviously, you know, setting that because we want to be able to drop the items into the world and then pick them back up. So we definitely need a mesh, but for now I'm just going to go with icon and mesh. All right, so this is all the crucial pieces that we need. We can actually fill out the data table struct now. And all it's going to be is it's going to be an instance of everything that we just made. So we want item type, item quality, stats. I'll just keep the proper name. Text, numeric, and asset. F item asset data. All right, and so now again, each one of these needs to be a U property. But you know, you can add a category on it because this is actually going to show up in the data table editor. And then go ahead and put that on each of these. All right, and so now this is ready. Let's see. So it's been added here. It's all filled out. It's got the required includes. It's got our generated body macros. It should be good to go, but now how do we actually make the project know that this belongs to it and be able to include it in other places? So for that, I'm going to close my IDE. I'm here in my project folder, and so by the way, I called this CS tutorial for core systems being like interaction, items, inventory. So that's what I named it. Obviously, you know, yours, name whatever you want. So whenever you make a kind of hierarchy change in terms of your source files, whether that be adding a new thing like this from scratch or deleting, because, you know, I don't know if you notice, but you cannot really delete C++ source files from the editor. You can do it here. Say I wanted to delete the CPP file. You delete it, come back, delete the intermediate and binaries folders, and then you right-click the U project and go to Generate Visual Studio Project Files. So, like I said, this goes for adding or deleting. Now, you want to make sure before you do this, especially with deleting, that it's not being relied on by a bunch of other stuff. But, you know, when I first started out, I would, you know, I'm real particular about naming of things a lot of times. So I would name like a class and then get irritated because I didn't like the name. And I realized, you know, well, how do I rename this? There's no easy way to do it. Really, the easiest way is to create a new one with the name you want, redirect everything in your source code, and then come in here and do this deletion process that I showed. So it's kind of clunky and it takes a little while, but it is very useful, and it's just generally the easiest way to make those kind of changes. So I'm going to give it a minute and let Rider reload everything, and then I'm going to do a build and launch the editor. And when all that's done, we should be ready to use this struct and make a data table. All right, so I'm back in the editor now. Again, all I did was, after I did the regeneration, I just did a full build. I did have to add in one of these ustruct body macros that I forgot, gave me a compiler error. So that was quick, then everything built and the editor launched. So just a few quick things before I make the data table. Whenever I'm starting with a brand new project, there's always a couple little things that I always set, especially my editor preferences. So like if you ever go and open a blueprint and you're annoyed by the fact that it opens on top of everything the way that I am, we can fix that. Go to editor preferences, and then right here, asset editor open location, change this to main window. That will make it to where it opens as a new tab. I don't know why that's not the default. The other cool thing I like to do is come down here to output log. I made my font size a little bit bigger just for when I do print statements and stuff later. Hopefully it shows up a little better on the recording. But this right here, category colorization mode, this is a cool feature that I just recently found. If you set it to, you can do like any of these options, but category only, I think is really nice because it just sets the name of the log category to a color. You can do as badge, so it kind of like highlights it, whole line, but I kind of just like this. It's minimal, but it's a nice little bit of visual distinction there. So those are two things that I always set. The other thing is I go, make sure that, it's back in editor preferences, make sure that under source code it's set to the IDE you're using. So obviously I'm on Rider. And then one thing I did before I was recording was I went in here so I reorganized these folders a little bit. I made a blueprints folder, I put the character in there, and then I made a framework folder and went under my game mode and made a blueprint of it. This is important just because you can have a game mode override here under world settings, where you can manually tell it to use certain things, but I prefer to set it under project settings, maps, and modes. You can set the game mode here and then specify what it's using here, and then you don't have to worry about this override. And so all I did, default pawn class is the blueprint, and then obviously the game mode is this is the blueprint I made. This third person character blueprint was one that was just part of the default project. When I made this project, it's just a C++ third person, so it came with this by default. All right, and so once that stuff is out of the way, come back here to your content browser, and we're going to make a new folder, and this one can just be called item data, because this is where we're going to have all the different data tables. And so when I say data tables plural, it's because the way I've decided to do it is to have a different data table for each kind of item grouping that I want, right? So if go back in here when I talked about the item types. So, mundane items, there's no reason to have consumables and spells mixed together in the same thing. There's no reason to really have a data table that mixes types. It's just, at least this is how my mind is working with it. It's easier to kind of separate these into their categories because that's what this enum is essentially going to control. So I decided to make a different data table for each type. And you can obviously have as many of these data tables as you want. You can divide it up however you want. This just seemed the most logical way to me. So go to right click in your folder, miscellaneous data table. And it's going to immediately pop up and say, okay, we need a row structure to use, right? Because each row in the data table, it's kind of like a spreadsheet, needs to know what types are in its field, what types are associated with its fields and so on and so forth. So do that, and you can either search or look right here and you can see there's our item data struct. Select that, hit OK. And I think I'm going to start with, I'll do mundane items to start with. Mundane items. So open this up, and you can see here these columns match what we put into our struct. Click add, and this is what I was talking about, by having it all in the item data category. Everything is nice and categorized for us in this tree structure. We have the different structs here. Everything's really accessible. It's all nice and clean and organized and easy to edit. And you can add as many items as you want and go down through here, tweak them, and really it's nice because you just do it in this one place. This will be essentially what's the master copy of this item data, and so if you ever need to change, you just change it in one place rather than needing to go to multiple copies of an item and edit it in each one or something like that. Now, one less important thing, and I realized I forgot something, so close this out. I'm going to close the editor. It's just my personal preference. Whenever I make changes in C++ code, I close the editor because I don't really trust the live coding, and especially not hot reload, which hopefully is going away. But the main thing I was gonna add, that I meant to add that I forgot, was an ID. So we want to have an item ID because this acts as the essentially search field for the data table. And I'll show you what I mean when I get back into the editor and open that up. Okay, so I'm back in the editor, and I'm gonna go back in here to my data table, and you can see now ID has been added. So if you look here, and we have row name, and then we have ID now. So when you go to search for an element in the data table, it needs a row name, and then it needs essentially like a search key. Let me find the... so basically there's a function called find row, and it takes in a... here, we'll just pull it up real quick. Yeah. All right, so here's the function. So function to find the row of a table given its name. It takes in a row name, and then it takes in a context string. And so these are, and then an optional warn if row missing. But these two are mandatory, but I didn't need them to be separate because I wanted to be able to essentially refer to one like master item data to the database by the item ID, and that would be the way that I find and pull out the item and all of its associated data. So what I decided to do was just make these the same. It's just the easiest thing. It doesn't, it's easier to remember at that point. And I'm gonna use some kind of like identifier that's like numbers and letters. So mundane items, it'll be like MUN 0001. That gives us up to 9,999 possibilities of items. and then you can go down and set that. And you see the row name needs to be something. And so I just figured if my ID that I'm going to use in the inventory is already a unique identifier, why not just go ahead and set the row name the same kind of way. So go down like this. We don't need this many right now because, you know, I don't even know if I have meshes for everything. Probably have to go on the marketplace and find some. So this really wraps up the data table creation section. You can go down through here now and start adding stuff if you want to. I'll probably add a couple of little things just to have before moving into the next section. But basically, you know, think of some items that you would like to have in a game. Mainly what should drive it is like, if you want to use it as part of this tutorial series, try to use something that you think you can get a mesh for, because that'll be a lot more fun rather than using a cube or a cylinder or something like that. You'll actually be able to get actual meshes so they have a visual representation in the world. So yeah, just be thinking about filling out some of this and finding some meshes and some icons for you know, any kind of item that you want, and we'll pick this back up in the next video.